You're watching the History Fella channel. In this video we're looking at the First Battle of Memphis. The First Battle of Memphis was a naval battle fought on the Mississippi River immediately north of the city, Memphis, Tennessee, on June 6, 1862, during the American Civil War. The engagement was witnessed by many of the citizens of Memphis. It resulted in a crushing defeat for the Confederate forces and marked the virtual eradication of the Confederate naval presence on the river. Despite the lopsided outcome, the Union Army failed to grasp its strategic significance. Its primary historical importance is that it was the last time civilians with no prior military experience were permitted to command ships in combat. As such, it's a military milestone in the development of professionalism in the United States Navy. The defending Confederates closely matched the advancing Federal force in raw numbers, with 8 rebel vessels opposing 9 Union gunboats and rams, but the fighting qualities of the former were far inferior. Each was armed with only 1 or 2 guns, of a light caliber that would be ineffective against the armour of the gunboats. The primary weapon of each was its reinforced prow, which was intended to be used in ramming opponents. The Confederate rams were distinguished by a unique feature of their defense against the enemy. Their engines and other interior spaces were protected by double bulkheads of heavy timbers, covered on the outer surface by a layer of railroad iron. The gap between the bulkheads, a space of 22 inches, was packed with cotton. Although the cotton was the least important part of the armour, it caught the public's attention, and the boats came to be called cotton-clads. Later in the war, ships' crews were often protected from small arms fire by bales of cotton placed in exposed positions, and these vessels were also referred to as cotton-clads. These differed, however, from the originals of the category. The Federal force consisted of 5 gunboats, 4 of which were known semi-officially as Eads gunboats, after the builder James Buchanan Eads, but more commonly as Pook turtles, after their designer Samuel M. Pook, and their strange appearance. The 5th gunboat, flagship Benton, was also a product of the Eads shipyards, but was converted from a civilian craft. Each of these vessels carried from 13 to 16 guns. The other 4 vessels were naval rams from the United States Ram Fleet. They had no armament whatsoever, aside from the small arms carried by the officers. All of the rams had been converted from civilian riverboats and had no common design. Both sides entered the battle with faulty command structures. The Federal gunboats were members of the Mississippi River Squadron, commanded directly by Flag Officer Charles H. Davis, who reported to Major General Henry W. Halleck. The gunboats were thus a part of the United States Army, although their officers were supplied by the Navy. The rams were led by Colonel Charles Ellet, Jr., who reported directly to Secretary of War Edwin M. Stanton. Thus, the Federal fleet consisted of 2 independent organizations with no common command outside of Washington. The Confederate arrangement was even worse. The cotton-clads, about half of the group of 14 river steamers that had been seized at New Orleans and converted into rams to defend that city. Known as the River Defense Fleet, it was split into 2 when the Confederate holdings on the river became threatened from both the North and the Gulf of Mexico. 6 were retained below New Orleans to face the fleet of David G. Farragut, while 8 were sent up to Memphis to block the Union descent down the river. Sending them this far north did not violate their original purpose, as Memphis was regarded as a shield for New Orleans. The northern section was commanded overall by James E. Montgomery, a riverboat captain in civilian life. The other boats were also commanded by former civilian riverboat captains, selected by Montgomery and with no military training. Once underway, Montgomery's command ceased, and the rams operated independently. The futility of the arrangement was recognized immediately by military men, but their protests were disregarded. Furthermore, the captains could neither learn how to handle the guns themselves nor assign crew members to the task, so gun crews had to be drawn from the Confederate Army. The gunners were not integrated into the crews, but remained subject to the orders of their army officers. As a result of the Federal victory at Corinth, the railroads that linked Memphis with the eastern part of the Confederacy had been cut, severely reducing the strategic importance of the city. Therefore, in early June 1862, Memphis and its nearby forts were abandoned by the rebel army. Most of the garrison was sent to join units elsewhere, including Vicksburg, and only a small rear guard was left to make a token resistance. The river defense fleet was also to have retreated to Vicksburg, but it could not get enough coal in Memphis. Unable to flee when the Federal fleet appeared on June 6, Montgomery and his captains had to decide whether to fight or scuttle their boats. They chose to fight, steaming out in the early morning to meet the advancing flotilla, and the rams trailing behind it, with Memphis citizens cheering them on. The battle started with an exchange of gunfire at long range. The Federal gunboats setting up in a line of battle across the river and firing their rear guns at the cottonclads, coming up to meet them as they entered the battle stern first. Two of the four rams advanced beyond the line of the gunboats and rammed or otherwise disrupted the movements of their opponents. The other rams misinterpreted their orders and did not enter the battle at all. With the Federal rams and gunboats not coordinating their movements and the Confederate vessels operating independently, the battle was soon reduced to a melee. It was agreed by all that the ram flagship Queen of the West initiated hostilities by slamming into the CSS Colonel Lovell. She was then rammed in turn by one or more of the remaining cottonclads. Elliott was at this time wounded by a pistol shot in his knee, thereby becoming the only casualty on the Union side. The remainder of the battle, obscured by more than a fog of war, several eyewitnesses' accounts are available. However, they are mutually contradictory to a greater degree than usual. All that is certain is that at the end of the battle, all but one of the cottonclads were either destroyed or captured, and one Yankee boat, Queen of the West, was disabled. The sole boat to escape, the CSS General Earl Van Dorn, led to the protection of the Yazoo River just north of Vicksburg. The battle, which took less than 2 hours in the early morning of June 6th, resulted in the immediate surrender of the city of Memphis to Federal authorities by noon that day. The Confederate casualties totaled approximately 100 killed or wounded and another 150 taken prisoner. The Union forces captured and repaired the CSS General Price, the CSS General Bragg, the CSS Sumter, and the CSS Little Rebel, and added them to the Mississippi River Squadron. The Battle of Memphis was an aside from the latter appearance of the ironclad, the CSS Arkansas. The final challenge to the Federal thrust down the Mississippi River against Vicksburg, the river was now open down to that city, which was already besieged by Farragut's ships, but the Federal Army authorities did not grasp the strategic importance of the fact by nearly another 6 months. Not until November 1862 would the Union Army under Ulysses S. Grant's attempt to complete the opening of the river. The poor performance of the river defense fleet, both at Memphis and at the earlier Battle of New Orleans, was the final demonstration that naval operations had to be commanded by trained professionals, subject to military discipline. The Elliott Rams remained in federal service, but they had no other opportunity for combat of the sort of which they were intended. They were soon transformed into amphibious raiding bodies. The Mississippi Marine Brigade, led by Elliott's brother, Lieutenant Colonel Alfred W. Elliott. The demand for increased professionalism also resulted in the elimination of privateering, although the river's defense fleet was not composed of privateers in the usual meaning of the term. Another Civil War military engagement took place in Memphis, namely the Second Battle of Memphis, in April 1864, when Confederate General Nathan Bedford Forrest led a nighttime cavalry raid on Memphis with the intent of freeing Confederate prisoners and capturing Union generals encamped there. The raid failed in both goals, but forced the Union Army to guard the area more diligently. If you found the information in this video informative or helpful, please feel free to give the video a thumbs up, and please, if you haven't already, consider subscribing to the channel. I thank you very much for watching and listening to this video. I shall see you in the next video.